There are many, many lessons taught in Pirkei Avos, but in today's idea of Bein Adam Lechavero and interpersonal relationships, we're going to discuss an odd phenomenon that, as far as I remember, only occurs twice in Pirkei Avos, and that is that a lesson is repeated. The second lesson that we see repeated is the idea of being makdim shalom l'chol adam, greeting every single person first, meaning being the first person to go over to somebody else and say, how are you doing? Now, when it's two friends meeting up, let's say you're getting together, or a coworker that you come into work, and being the first one to say hello really just comes down to who's going to see who first. And that's not so awkward. This idea is that when you pass somebody on the street and you see somebody, so you be the first person to greet them. And that is a idea of Bein Adam Lechavero, because what you're doing is you're being sensitive to the other person. Nobody likes being ignored. Nobody likes being put into the shadows. So if you strive to recognize somebody by greeting them and say, hey, how are you doing? Makdim Shalom doesn't mean just saying shalom like in modern day Hebrew. It means asking about them and going over to them and saying, hey, how are you? It's not just a nod in the street and as you pass by them. There's a famous story told of Rabbi Kamenetsky, who was one of the great rabbis in America. He passed away in the 1980s. And Rabbi Kamenetsky, at his funeral, a nun showed up. And everybody's looking at this nun, and his family didn't know that this nun, and they had never heard their father talk about this nun. They didn't know who she was, and they went over to the nun and said, why are you here? And she said, this rabbi, every morning when I was on my way to my church and he was on his way to the synagogue, we would pass each other in the street, and he was always careful to greet me and ask me how I was, being makdim shalom l'kol adam, even a great rabbi greeting a nun every single morning and asking after her and seeing how she was. That's a tremendous Kiddush Hashem, to the point where this nun felt she should attend his funeral. An incredible, incredible lesson for us all. Shalom.